one of the things that you see sometimes in moments in art history that have high activity, and I'm not just talking about the visual arts, where you have things like the Renaissance or this amazing conglomeration of just total heavyweights that Picasso was surrounded with. But you see it in things like the Harlem Renaissance, or uh, I'm just off the top of my head. These are other examples of this phenomena where you have a bunch of just phenomenal artists concentrated in one place, and they're all kind of feeding off each other and in competition with each other. I think like Norman Mailer at one point said, I would have been a better writer if I had better writers around me in my generation, which is a really pompous thing to say, but it might have also been true.
Norman.
I know guy's such an ass, but he that there's a point to that. And I was just talking to this biographer of Hemingway, Mary Dearborn, and she was talking about all the literary titans gathered around in Paris at this time, um, along with the artistic talents like Picasso, like Matisse, like Modigliani, Braque. I don't know if he was in Paris, but he was certainly in the ether. What I mean, it's I can't wrap my mind around it. How were all these geniuses? How did they all find each other in this one place?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a big question. It's one I've occasionally thought of writing a book about it, because I've written a lot about the
Do it.
Florentine.
Seriously, do it. That would be a
Well, I
great
can
book.
find a publisher who's interested. I might well do that.
Okay.
It's so I, as I said, spent a lot of time writing about the Florentine Renaissance, which is another, if you look at sort of 5th century BC Athens, or Florence in the Quattrocento, or Paris at the turn of the 20th century. These are places where a critical mass sort of built up of talent and creativity, and to find a kind of underlying rule. I mean, it would be nice to find a kind of one word answer to why that is the case.
Right.
In the case, I guess the term critical mass comes to mind. That there has to be, but the conditions are, have to be right. I think in Paris, at the turn of the century, was sort of uniquely capable of, it had for decades, taken art very seriously. You had the Académie des Beaux-Arts, you had the annual salons, and a lot of the art was dreck, but people took it seriously. Tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of people went to see these shows, and the French government supported it, and it was. It's like a big, I can't imagine. I don't know if there's anything now that is sort of the equivalent of that. A kind of, just.
No, I can't think of anything like that, which is, I mean, it's a real shame because we have things like the National Endowment for the Arts, but people, something like Piss Christ, which was a sculpture of a statue of Christ in a jar of urine for people who don't know, and people, go up in arms that, oh, taxpayer dollars are paying for this profanity, and it's like, God, like I wish we had some public financing for the arts. There had been like a few moments like that in American history, like during the Great Depression. I think there was I don't know if that was part of the
Works
Works
Progress Administration.
Yeah.
I mean, that sort of helped build. That helped, a lot of the artists who went
Totally.
on at the New York School. De Kooning and Pollock and Rothko and all those people worked in these. Were supported by the government. And the interesting thing though about Paris, and maybe this is happens more often than not, was that the greatness of Paris was, I mean, there was a lot of government funding for the arts, a lot of the official schools where you got trained in the academic style, and the Napoleon III would come and bestow his praise on one particular artist who would then become successful and rich. But the art that we now take seriously, that we now look at, is art that was made against that. The famous 1863 Salon des Refusés, the Salon of the Rejected, where many people say it's the beginning of modern art, where Manet shows Déjeuner sur l'herbe, much this. So there was this tension between, yes, there was enormous government support, there was enormous interest in the journals about this. Everybody wrote about it, but the great art, the artists we now look at were the artists who set themselves up in opposition to that, who rejected that or were rejected by that. You have Manet, and then you have the Impressionists, and they were, that you had their defenders, but then you had people. But everybody wanted to be in Paris, if only to tear the whole thing down. I mean, you had to be where the enemy was in order to, there wasn't much point in railing against the establishment if you were off somewhere in, some provincial town somewhere.